Franklin County resident is suing the state in hopes of forcing an earlier special election to fill the Senate District 26 seat. Of course, that was left vacant recently by Senator Gary Stubblefield. Bentonville attorney Jennifer Standerfer filed the lawsuit on behalf of Franklin County resident Colt Shelby. She joins us on Conduit today to explain what's at stake. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jenny. Appreciate it.
Uh, Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on Conduit on such short notice. For those who are not following this closely just yet, and like you and I've talked about offline, I mean, this just was filed on Monday, October 6th. Tell us what this lawsuit is all about and why it was filed.
Sure. So, sadly, Senator Stubblefield passed away on September 2nd, leaving a vacancy in his office. The governor has the ability to set the special election date to fill that vacancy. Initially, when she said it, I think 479, 473 days out, somewhere in that range. She did shorten that a bit down to 200 and some days. But where we're at now is the law actually requires that special elections be filled quickly, that they be filled within 150 days, except for in very limited circumstances. It's still well outside of that, and it's set at a time that's going to prevent the folks in Senate District 26 from having representation in budget hearings and in the fiscal session. And so when Colt came to me and some of the folks in Franklin County came to me, that was their concern, that there are a lot of big issues right now, not just the one we've been reading about in the news. There's a lot of expenditures going on and a lot of policies that this rural county really needs the support, and the whole district needs the support of a representative in the General Assembly as soon as possible.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I want to talk to you specifically, but before we go more into the lawsuit, just what is at stake. I think for many, we know that Franklin County and the proposed prison there has dominated the headlines. Um, as you mentioned, I believe that the fiscal session will be starting earlier of next year. And when you don't have representation like that with, budget spending and that sort of thing, where does that leave those residents?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's everything. It's all the issues in front of you, whatever you care about, whether it's education, rural hospitals, broadband connections, technology, farm assistance. I mean, there are so many issues that are important to voters across the state. And that's why we have these representatives, right? That's why we have them there, is to represent their communities and their voters and the folks in those communities that have a very specific perspective. So yes, the prison has been in the news a lot, but by not allowing them to have a representative in the fiscal session, I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars in taxpayer money that's being allocated for the fiscal year in that fiscal session. And to have voters who won't have a say in that and won't have representation in that is really a tragedy and, in our opinion, unconstitutional.
A lot of our viewers and followers on Conduit, when they first heard about this, and this is part of the course for Conduit followers, so they're like taxation without representation, and I'm sure that it certainly feels that way for a lot of those residents there. What would you say to that argument?
Yes, I did it too. It's actually really interesting. This is where I kind of geek out a little bit because, like, I've gone back to the Federalist Papers, right? And I can't
Yeah.
reread the entirety of the Federalist Papers in the couple of weeks before we go to court. But, um, but it really is, some of the ideas that we're talking about are so fundamental that they predate the American Revolution, not just the Constitution. So what you see in the Constitution is, you don't see the words no taxation without representation in the Constitution. You don't
Mhm.
see that in our case law or in our statutes, really. What you see is a constitution that was built based upon that framework, that our United States and our Arkansas constitutions were built on an entire structure that's focused on making sure that we have a representative form of government, that we go to elections, we vote for the person to represent them, and we let that person show up and make these choices for us. And so from a legal perspective, it's been really interesting. Every day I'm finding new law and new sort of avenues for the argument of the unconstitutionality of this act, but
Mhm.
it's largely because this is so fundamental that that the right to have a representative stand up for you and represent you, especially when we're talking about spending taxpayer money, especially in that context. I mean, they should have it for all reasons all the time. Of course, sometimes vacancies happen, and you're without representation for a limited time, but never this long. And there's no reason to wait until June. It's just it's an excessive amount of time given the fact that we have elections all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk more about that. But I also noticed that, we're talking about Franklin County, but you filed this lawsuit in Pulaski County. Why did you do that?
I lost so much sleep about this one.
Hmm.
I will tell you, just sort of because it's the right thing to do, I really wanted to file in Franklin County. I really wanted, I believe, I feel very strongly that we would have a good resolution and a reasoned decision from judges in the Franklin County District as well as Pulaski County. I think we are going to get a fair and impartial judicial system assessment of this. But practically speaking, I have to look at it in terms of getting it to trial quickly, getting a decision quickly, and getting the right decision. So what my witness, my plaintiff, Colt Shelby, is actually on an oil rig in North Dakota right now. He lives
Okay.
in Franklin County. He travels for work. We don't know exactly when the hearing is going to be set yet, but usually it's set quickly, and I may need him to testify remotely.
Hmm.
And sadly, when you look at courthouses across the state, our rural counties are underfunded compared to some of our more urban counties. Um, it's it's just it's the same
Yeah.
problem we deal with rural counties all the time.
Mhm.
I know that in Pulaski County, I'm going to have a solid internet connection, and I know the courts are going to have the technology on hand ready to go for him to testify electronically if we need to do that. I'm not confident that Franklin County is always able to do that. I know that they do their best. I know that they do have access to it. But when you're talking about something with this much to risk, I have to take the easy one over the one
Yeah.
that's more complicated when I have both of
Yeah.
those options in front of me.
That makes sense. So I was just curious about that. I want to talk more about the state's response and the political implications regarding, filling the seat. The governor and the state say that these election dates were set to save taxpayer money and streamline the process. Why do you believe that that's not the case?
Yeah, so there are a few things. I think the simplest is they have primary elections in March. And if the point is to save taxpayer money and to increase voter turnout, then you just hold them in March. And I don't know why you hold them in June instead of March. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, practically
Mhm.
speaking. But secondly, this language in the state statute that says that the governor can set it further than 150 days if it's impractical or unduly burdensome. It sounds like no big deal. It sounds like they can just do that to make it easier. Like if it's inconvenient, they can just set it on whatever date they want. But that's a that's a pretty broad restriction, a pretty broad grant of discretion when you're talking about the right to vote and the right
Yeah.
to have these elections and to conduct these elections and the rights to have a representative in your government, the right to equal protection, the right to due process. Like there are
Mhm.
so many constitutional rights that are violated by pushing these dates further and further out that you have to weigh those two things against each other. Also, the money to pay for the election is coming from the folks in Senate District 26, right?
Right.
They should have some say in what they spend their money on. And I think that they're making it real clear right now that they would love to spend that money on the election. They're okay with the cost of the election. They want to ensure that they have a representative in the government right now, and they want to elect their senator.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, the impractical, too burdensome. That's just so vague. And, how does one even argue that in court? And another thing that I thought was really interesting, you mentioned that originally they set it was 427 days out, which is just, I don't even know what to say about that. But
More
then
than a
now
year.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, and now it's 280 days. Um, by doing that, do you think or view it as the state kind of already, there's some admittance that the law was violated whenever they first said it, now they bumped it up a bit more? How do you view that?
You know, sadly, the writ of election didn't tell us why, right? Ideally, rather than just saying it's impractical and unduly burdened, in the writ of election, the governor would say, these are the reasons why we can't do it on the state, right?
Mhm.
But they didn't do that in this case. And I do think that's part of the reason that we need to be in a courtroom with a judge looking at this, because that question is still open. I've heard lots of rumors about why. Some of them have been political accusations. Some of them have been practical election concerns. Some of them have been things like cost savings or voter turnout, but none of them reach a level that justifies disenfranchising those voters. And I think this is one of the things that I'm hopeful they will present testimony about in court. I'm hopeful that someone will come and testify as to exactly why they believe it to be impractical or unduly burdensome. But at the moment, the only clue they've given to it is it's because we say so.
Why do you think that the Republican Party of Arkansas, originally they came out and made a statement about this the special election, but there has not been anything since then? Why do you think that they haven't released a statement since the first announcement?
Well, I don't speak for Republicans, but I do feel confident that as an Arkansan, I can largely speak for Arkansans. And I think that this is sort of an issue that transcends party and it transcends politics. This is a question of whether Arkansans deserve the right to have a representative in all aspects of
Mhm.
legislative council and how the legislature enacts when they're out of session, but even more so when they go into session, right? I mean, like we all know that's a different thing there. And so I expect there are Republicans on both sides of this. I expect there may be Democrats on both sides of this. I expect the independents have a very strong position, right? I think this is more a question of what Arkansans want and the Arkansans' right to representation in our General Assembly. And it doesn't really matter what either the parties think or don't think to me. I'm kind of glad they're staying out of it.
Yeah, probably a lot of people would agree with you on that. You've also pointed to a memo, and I will upload this to whenever we get the this posted online at conduitnews.com. And that memo shows from the state that there's been no special election that has been delayed that long. Do you think that provides or has any type of historical context that lends into your argument in the lawsuit?
Sure. So I've actually requested the official documents to verify what is seen in there and reflected. And so I don't want to speak to that with
Sure.
certainty because I haven't reviewed those yet. Um, but yeah, I think it's pretty clear that we've never had one set this far out. And granted, it's not as far out as it was originally set, but it's still a lot further. You know,
Mhm.
there have been a few that were over the 150-day mark. And I haven't had time to look into the reasons for those going over, but none of them hit 200 days. All of them were still pretty close generally
Mhm.
to that
Yeah.
restriction. So I think that is compelling evidence. I think it's interesting. I think it's more evidence, though, of the respect that our elected officials typically have for the right to representation. I don't know that it has a whole lot of legal pull. I think it shows that we have a long history in Arkansas of devoted public servants putting Arkansans first. And, the governor still has a chance to pull it back. It may be that she watches this interview or another interview or talks to her lawyers or hears what happens in court and may decide to move it up, to March or to December as we've requested. And we would love for that to happen. And of course, would non-suit if that happened. Um, but but regardless, I think we're just sort of in a different day in this
Yeah.
country right now where government feels like it's getting bigger and it's getting more powerful and it just needs people to stand up and remind them that there are rules, right? Like
Yeah.
there are restrictions. And I don't blame anyone who gets too big for their britches. Oftentimes it's fed and fueled by the media and us and all the people telling them they're great and wonderful. But
Yeah.
there are times when the mama has to step in the room and say, no, you got to slow down now. You got to back it up. And the courts traditionally are how we do that. And so I'm looking forward to sort of putting this all out in front of the judge and seeing what her position is.
Yeah, well, let's just say that the judge lets this decision by the governor and the state stand. What kind of precedent do you think that would set, and what what does it even say about our Arkansas Constitution and the law?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, just as an Arkansan, not even as a lawyer, I think I'd be a little heartbroken by it. We just we deserve to have representatives. It doesn't even have to be the one I vote for, right? It just has to be the
Yeah,
one that gets the majority vote in my community. And I agree with all of the policy goals of increasing voter turnout and saving money, and like those are all important things to consider and to do, but they are all secondary to the right to vote. They are all secondary to the right to representation. And especially when you've got an entire district standing up and saying, let's let's do it. Let's have this election now. Let's get someone in there
yeah.
now. Um, I will be saddened if the result is that a government has gotten too big to hear the voters of Senate District 26.
Before I let you go, what are you hearing from the voters there in Senate District 26? I know that you've talked obviously with your client Colt, but what is the overall impression, or what are you hearing from those now that this lawsuit has been filed?
Lots of excitement, lots of gratitude, lots of sort of pep talks and cheers, lots of offers for help. Can we, like, what do you need? What information you need? How do we help you? It's really, it's a hell of a community.
Mhm.
This whole area. And remember, SD 26 isn't just Franklin County, it's
I
Johnson
was going
County,
to say that.
Logan
Yeah.
County, and parts of Sebastian County as well.
Yeah.
And the whole district. It's interesting because it's a voter rights case, right? It's taught we're talking about voter suppression and elections, and but it's not about black versus white. It's not about church versus no church or
Mhm.
women versus men. It's not sort of the typical discrimination type suits. I mean, these are just Arkansans, like a whole district of Arkansans that just want an earlier election. And so it's really kind of a privilege to be able to go to court and help them. And I'm confident that we will get a fair and reasons decision. And I'm hoping it's the one that we want it to be.
Yeah. I can't help but think about the press conference that Senator Brian King had with Senator Stubblefield's daughter, Amber, and she, closed. She wasn't going to speak, but a reporter asked if she would, and she basically just said, we need a special election. My dad and this office deserve that respect, and it was really difficult to watch that and know she shouldn't be having to do this right now. The state and elected officials should do the right thing. They know what the law says, and then let this family grieve, and celebrate the life of their dad and granddad and husband. But it would be really difficult to watch that and continue to hold the line and not give the people there in Senate District 26 representation.
Yeah, it's one of the things that disappoints me so deeply about our government, but also gives me so much faith in Arkansans.
Mm.
She has so much grit and determination, every bit that her daddy did, and it's lovely to meet folks like that and to watch them stand up for what's right and what they believe in, even especially when it's hard.
Yeah. Before we let you go, anything else that you want to add about this lawsuit? And as far as next step, time is of the essence. I know this is something that you want to get moving quickly. What are you anticipating next?
Yeah, myself and the Attorney General's office are both working with the court to get a scheduling order and figure out what days that we're coming in. And then once we do that, we'll start issuing subpoenas and get as many of the necessary witnesses to court as we can. This is one of the tricky parts about election laws. Everything's expedited. So we don't have months and months of depositions and pleadings, and I don't always know what folks are going to say when they get to court. So you really just sort of get the right, smartest people there
Mm.
so that they can answer questions truthfully and honestly. And then we ask the judge to make a decision based on that. So in some ways, I'm as in the dark as the rest of you are, but we're going to get everyone there. We're going to put everything in front of the judge, and I'm confident we'll get a good decision.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on Conduit today. Of course, this will be something that we follow the entire time and would love to have you back on to provide an update.
Of course. Thanks, Jenny.